actually, Fred, goes far beyond what you're talking about. That the churches are institutionally oppressive, believe you me, I do agree. I experience it all the time. But even given that, the Roman Catholic Church in South America has produced the likes of Helder Camara, Gustavo Gutierrez, Oscar Romero, shot by right-wing death squads as he celebrated Mass, because of his insistence on the option for the poor and his challenging, in a very Marxist way, the institutions and ideologies of the San Salvadorian state, the El Salvadorian state. We can talk more about that later, I hope we will. I was taught by Dennis Turner, a Catholic theologian in Bristol in the 1980s. Turner puts forward the thesis that just as in the 13th century the Church adopted the Aristotelian philosophical synthesis, mediated to it by Averroes and Avicenna, the Islamic philosophers, so now in the 20th, as it was then, 20th century, Marxism is the philosophical framework which the Church must use to understand the world. Now, I actually don't agree with him completely at all, but nevertheless there is enough in his thesis to be deeply challenging and helpful to the Christian Church. You have challenged and helped us if you are Marxists. We understand more of the truth because of your insistence on things like ideology and the way that groups can speak for their class interests in disguised ways, and the importance, yes, of the class struggle, and of the contradictions inherent in systems, which are the motive for change, but then which produce other contradictions in their turn. All this we have found profoundly helpful, I think. So Christianity then is clearly communist. What about the Vatican and the evangelical right in the US? Well, clearly these are embarrassing counterexamples for anyone who wants to suggest that Christianity is always of the left or progressive. So I have to say to you, as a Methodist minister, I suspect that almost all of my colleagues would describe themselves as such, politically. But the reason these counterexamples exist is because of our profound differences with Marxism, but also with capitalism. And I want to suggest briefly that these are not primarily about theology, but about anthropology, about the Christian account of what it means to be human, which is quite distinct from that of the Marxist, who paradoxically, or at least at Marx, let's talk about Marx, though interestingly Marx seems to me to have a great deal in common with Adam Smith in their basic understanding of what it means to be human. For both Marx and the classical economists whose insights he developed, man, and it is of course man, for all those thinkers who so undervalue the work of women and its contribution to the welfare of the race, man's plight comes from his economic activity being in several ways stolen, alienated, sometimes in gross ways, starvation, wages, etc., sometimes in more subtle ways, his work being made boring and uncreative, to be liberated and restored. Man, above all, proletarian man, who has been trained and disciplined in the very capitalist system that has enslaved him, becomes aware of his plight, and then, as capitalism collapses, expropriates the expropriators. Well, you know all this stuff, don't you? Now, in this analysis, there is so much that is true and decent and humane. And Marx is not, as some have alleged, bereft of a vision for what it might be like to live creatively without such alienation. But it remains a vision deeply in tune with the Enlightenment's understanding of what it means to be human. It is deeply imbued with a confidence that once we are truly aware of what our self-interest is, we shall act as rational agents and realise those interests properly. And here there's a deep agreement with the most convinced of Marx's capitalist opponents. Before you rejoice at the collapse of capitalism too easily, you should ponder what the crisis says about the ability of even the owners of the means of production to act rationally. Take Alan Greenspan, former US Federal Reserve Chairman, one of the prime proponents of that faith in the markets which Noam Chomsky has called the religiosity of the Anglo-American elite. Those of us who have looked at the self-interest of lending institutions to protect shareholders' equity are, he says, in a state of shocked disbelief. Disbelief. He's lost his faith that people will act to protect their self-interests. Because that's his account of human beings. We, once we know, act in rational ways. I suggest that actually that is a confidence shared by Marx. That once you are made aware, once the proletariat realises who it is, how it has been oppressed, then it will act. The revolution will come. And against this account of humanity and society is a seemingly much less optimistic account advanced by traditional Christianity. We do not say, of course, that humanity is irrational, nor that humanity has no access to truth, except that from divine revelation. We don't say that. Science is true. It gives us real insights into the world, as do other forms of knowledge. But what we say is that that rationality is bounded. Bounded in ways which are not altogether, can never be altogether available to us. There's a bias in man, says Chesterton, like the bias in a bowl. When we run crooked. We fail to hit the mark. And actually that precise metaphor of failing to hit the mark is what the Greek word hamartia, used in the Greek Testament for sin, means. It's a metaphor. To sin is to miss the mark, not to quite get there. But by not quite getting there, we make huge messes. Our rationality is bounded. And I suggest to you that if you look at the history to which we both appeal of the last 2 centuries, that account has a great deal more going for it than the account of Marx and Adam Smith of human nature. Related to this is another thing I haven't perhaps got time to advance, but I will do it very briefly, and that is to say that Marx's belief that we become truly human as we engage in struggle, as in creative interaction with the world, with nature. That is how we become human. Yes, but he ignored another struggle, another interaction with that within. And I'll leave you, because my 20 minutes are up, just with the thought of Socrates, that no one sins willingly. By which he did not mean, of course, that often repeated statement by Socrates, he did not mean that, we don't actually enjoy sinning sometimes, but rather that we were unaware, we are always unaware of what the true good is. Because, says Socrates, if we were aware, then we would align ourselves with it, if we just realised. Marx and Smith are confident that we can realise what the true good is, and we will follow it. Christians are far more sceptical.